Cool. I'm really excited to be here. It's my third time in Seoul. This time I don't have enough time to actually travel around, but it's my first time to Campus Seoul, and it's an honor to be here. So thanks everyone for showing up. I'm going to start this talk talking a little bit about hackers and the different objectives that hackers have, and I'll end the talk with some tips for startups. So it's a little bit of some mixed content, and then I'm happy to stick around for questions afterwards. Get rid of the badge. Okay. My job title is Security Princess. I actually gave myself this job title when I started at Google a long time ago. My official job title back then was Information Security Engineer in the Information Security Engineering team. And that just felt like a lot of words to say, and it wasn't very meaningful. And so I thought that I would pick something that was a little bit funny or ironic. I was actually going to Asia for an industry conference, and my colleagues said, you have to get business cards. And so I wanted to get business cards that would make people smile when they saw them. And so I've kept it ever since, and it's successful in sort of making people smile and not take things so seriously. In addition to Google, I've also worked at the US government under the Obama administration. And I help secure some government technologies too. So I have some experience in industry and also government. And for the first 5 years at Google, I helped to secure most of our web applications. And then for the past 5 years, I've been leading the Chrome security team. So that's a little bit of my experience. Now, this talk is a little bit interactive, and so I really need you to help me with some questions. It's really hard when you're standing on stage and nobody answers questions, so I know that you guys will help me and not leave me in a painful situation. What is a hacker? Does anyone have any suggestions for what they think a hacker is? Come on, someone save me. Yeah. Okay, so hackers do 1/10 or 1/20th of.
Then probably like hackers does something undefined area. That's what I define not the software engineers. I think someone who changed the system, such as unfair laws or something like that. Those are all the hackers to me.
Yeah, I think that's actually getting at a lot of what my definition is also. Does anyone have an alternate suggestion? Yeah? Someone who tries to figure out something. Here we're talking about, there's defined behavior, there's known behavior that software engineers do, hackers do something else. So this is actually very much what I'm getting at. Sometimes when I ask this question, people say the people who install malware or the people who steal people's accounts. And one of the goals for this presentation is to get at a more generic definition of hacker, and it doesn't necessarily mean something malicious. So what my definition to you would be is a hacker who finds out some way to use software or a system in an unintended way. So in a way that the engineers did not intend for it to be used, which I think is what you were getting at. Does anyone know who these two gentlemen are? Yeah? Good, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Sometimes people get Steve Jobs, and I'm always sad that they don't know Steve Wozniak, because he was the one who did all the engineering. Right, so you probably recognize them from a little company called Apple. But before they started Apple, they actually were selling digital blue boxes from their college dorm room. And digital blue boxes were these devices that actually exploited flaws in the telephone system so that you can get free long-distance phone calls. So they were actually hackers. These were hackers of the 1960s and 1970s, and they were also known as phone phreakers. And I would say that they didn't do this for damage or to steal free phone calls. I mean, they did get free phone calls, but the motivation was really to explore and to understand and to use the system in unintended ways. So I would say that, if anyone has an iPhone or a MacBook in the audience, you might have to admit that there's some benefit to tolerating some types of hackers. All right, so what are hackers' objectives? I don't think that, hackers are people. People are complicated. I don't think that people can be lumped into, good and bad. We're a little bit more complicated than that. So I want to go over a couple of common objectives that I've seen in my 10 years working at Google and in security. This won't cover everything, but I think it can be illustrative into what is the driving force behind a lot of hackers. So these are the categories we're going to go over. The first one is the hackers that ultimately want more secure software. All right, so how do you determine what software you install on your laptop, on your phone? How do you just make a decision as to whether this is a safe piece of software or not? Does anyone want to volunteer how they make a decision? Keep using it in different ways till it okay, so you're actually even, you're already thinking like the hacker of trying to stress test or security test the application yourself. And this is how actual security engineers and very like-minded folks will try to determine it. They'll try to actually break the software. I was actually looking for, maybe some people look at recommendations or reviews in a store, or they ask their security-savvy friends. But security practitioners will actually try to penetration test or test the software to see if they can break it. We're going to do actually an exercise together. And because I don't know the software stack experience and specific application experience within the room, we're going to do something that everyone should be familiar with, which is a vending machine. I want you to be the security auditor or the security tester and introduce yourself to the person who's sitting next to you. If nothing else, you'll have made a friend this evening. And I want you to think through possible ways that you could attack this vending machine to actually get snacks out in a way that maybe the designers didn't intend or they don't have defenses for. And I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes to actually talk through some ideas with whoever's sitting next to you. Maybe you can pair up with these two, and then we'll share ideas and hear what everyone came up with. So go for it. Okay, I want to hear some of your ideas. Did anyone think of the sledgehammer attack? Okay, some people thought of that. Did anyone think of anything different? Yeah, in the back? Cool. Melting the plastic on the surface. So that would be the blowtorch attack? Cool. Anything else? Yep. Counterfeit coins, yeah. So this is a €2 coin, and these are actual other currencies, international currencies that are made from the same exact mint and can fool machines. I actually, just before coming to this presentation, noticed that the 500 Korean won, maybe I heard someone say yeah, so maybe maybe they already knew this. 500 yen and 500 Korean won are very similar in size, and by drilling holes into the surface of the won, you can actually go to Japan and get 500 yen back. It sounds like you've done this before. Okay, you don't have to admit it. But yeah, counterfeit currency is really common. Any other ideas? Yeah? Yep. Dollar on the string totally works. Anything else? I saw something over here like doing some yoga, and so I think another maybe physical attack. So there's a lot of potential ways you could attack a vending machine. There's probably, some kind of ID on it, and you could look up the manual online. There's potentially electromagnetic attack you could do to the coin slot. There's a lock here, so anybody who can do lock picking might be able to get into it that way. Now, the goal of this talk is not for me to, go and encourage you to hack a vending machine, but really that there's no one answer, and anybody can sort of think like an attacker. That's one reason for doing this. The second one is that, even though there's a lot of different potential attacks to this vending machine, security is also about cost and benefit. And so maybe the perfect security for this vending machine might be to have a guard in front of it 24/7, but that doesn't really make sense for the value of what's in the machine. And so thinking about security for your own startups is also about thinking about, the assets you're trying to actually protect. Lots of different options to go into it, no one answer. And I think, if we had kept on doing this exercise, you might see that your own perspective will, come up with a different solution than somebody else. And so there's no one way to hack, and there's no one method that hackers are going to be thinking about how to break into a system. Okay, we talked about hackers that ultimately do what they do to make a system more secure. They find the weaknesses, and then this motivates them to build better defenses. There's also some hackers that just really enjoy the challenge of it, and are motivated to find a way to exploit a system, particularly if it's not able to be exploited. So, does anybody know who Loki Hart is? Okay, he's famous. He's of your country. So this is one of the most talented hackers that I know. This is actually a picture of him at a recent exploit contest in 2016. And he's found exploits in a number of, cutting edge pieces of software that the vendors claim to be really secure. He also makes money from the contests where he does this, but I think one of the main motivations he has is really to try to find exploits in software that, big security teams are trying to secure because of the challenge to actually do so. He's one of a number of different hackers that participate in these contests, and it really is some amount of, pride in being able to hack the unhackable. I think these first two categories of hackers can be real assets to security, and their creativity and their determination have resulted in finding weaknesses in software and ultimately making the software more secure. That is really important for technology. And so I think these are good hackers. Now, not all hackers are good, and I'm going to cover a couple of motivations and objectives that have led to some hackers causing damage. So there are the hackers that have something to say. Has anyone heard of Anonymous before? Okay, some people have raised their hands. So Anonymous is generally considered a loosely organized group of hacktivists, and these are hacker activists. They claim to not act under any direction of any single person, and they tend to try to make a statement, and their hacking usually will result in some kind of defacing of a page or bringing down a site, typically in order to make some kind of public statement. So I wanted to try to find out if there are any victims of Anonymous locally, and so I did find that there was some banking sites in South Korea that were brought down last year, although to be honest, I wasn't sure what the statement was that was actually made. Most of the victims from Anonymous tend to be some sort of political statement that's associated with it. Anonymous isn't the only hacktivist group. There are a number of different ones. This is from a report of hacktivist activity from 2016. And one thing you can see is all hacktivist groups have sort of ridiculous names. one of the challenges in defending against hacktivist groups are that it's pretty easy to actually get a bunch of different computers and target it towards a small site and actually bring that site down. It's also very hard to do attribution on the internet. So attribution is, finding who the source or guilty person is for any one act. And so this is actually a very difficult threat to effectively thwart. Google has made possible something called Project Shield for journalists and some government entities to be able to use their denial of service protection, because we see hacktivists being, especially effective during elections or other times with political action. But in general, this is a hard threat to avoid. Okay, and then of course there are the hackers that are motivated by money. So malware and cybercrime is probably the #1 source of financial damage now criminal-wise internationally. This is an example of a piece of malware that's semi-recent, and it's called CryptoLocker. And so CryptoLocker will actually, once it's installed on a victim's computer, it will encrypt all of your files. So all of your pictures, your music, your personal files, and it will demand payment with a time clock. And if you let the time clock expire, then it will throw away the encryption key. So essentially all of your files are ruined. It's interesting to see kind of the evolution of CryptoLocker, because this is a screenshot of an earlier version where you have 72 hours to pay a ransom via Bitcoin, and later versions will actually accept different types of payments. And I think it was because nobody knows how to use Bitcoin. And so that even attackers are kind of evolving the usability of their malware. Anyways, this results in a ton of financial crime and theft, and is an example of kind of mass extortion on the internet. So this is clearly in the illegal crime category of hackers that want money. But there are also ways for hackers to make money in more legitimate ways. So I already showed you that picture of Loki Hart, who participates in exploit contests. There's a number of vulnerability reward programs that industry software companies are actually running. And what this is where a company will say, okay, here are some rules, hackers, that you have to follow. You can't attack other people's user accounts. But if you hack us in this responsible way and find security bugs, then we will give you a reward for letting us know about it and giving us some time to actually fix the bug. And so Google has a vulnerability reward program that covers Chrome and all of our different web applications, as well as Android. And rewards are anywhere from $500 up to $100,000 US. So it's quite a lot of money. I put a couple other logos on the screen just to show you some of the other services that actually have vulnerability reward programs. And last year, actually, the US government even ran its own vulnerability reward program for the Pentagon and the Army. I remember when these first were launched, it was a bit controversial. Oh, you're going to be paying hackers for money to hack your services. But now it's considered almost an industry best practice. And it's something that I think medium startups should certainly consider leveraging. You don't necessarily have to run your own, but there's actually a service called HackerOne, which can help you set up your own vulnerability reward program and really take advantage of, the larger security community in reporting bugs to you and ultimately making your software more secure. Okay, and then the last objective that I see as very common is the hackers that want information. So one of the reasons that I'm actually in Asia is to talk about HTTPS adoption. And I think, I expect that this crowd is a little bit more tech savvy than some of the other groups that I've been talking to from media and PR. A lot of people think that the web is safe because it's so fast. They think that when they're loading a website that they're talking directly to that website and it's private and the request goes straight to the web server and it comes back to your device and there's no possibility that someone could interact with it. But in reality, we know that the internet is highly connected and there are a number of interconnected points between you and your web browser, whether it's on your laptop or your phone, and the website that you're connecting to. And any one of those points can actually be a potential for some person or the software that they're running to actually snoop on your connection or to tamper with that connection. Now, security people call this a man-in-the-middle attack. And it's actually a lot more common than what I think people would think. So some examples that I've seen, one is internet service providers acting as a man in the middle and actually inserting content into your network connection or just snooping and logging on that content, potentially to monetize later. So Comcast is one of the biggest internet service providers in the US, and the top left image is an example of them actually monitoring their customers' internet traffic and then showing them warnings based on that monitoring of the traffic. I've seen telephone companies actually change their privacy policies and user policies to say that they will be logging a lot of personally identifiable information and potentially using it to monetize or improve their services. And then I think we've seen also a number of increasing incidents over the last couple of years of intelligence gathering that is done most often via man-in-the-middle attacks. So this picture is from an incident where Iranian hackers actually intercepted Gmail users who are political dissidents. And this is something that I really worry about because we've seen just a growing number of nation states and large organizations doing intelligence gathering kind of at scale. And then there's always sort of the criminal attackers that can be man-in-the-middle attacks. So if you're in a open wireless network at a coffee shop, or if some attacker just has access to the network at some point, either they're administrator of the network, they work at that internet service provider, then anything that is sent in the clear, which is over HTTP, is vulnerable to them logging it, snooping on it, or actually tampering with it. And so this is a picture of a wall of sheep, that's what it's called at a security conference, where they actually project onto the screen all of the traffic that's non-encrypted, on a big dashboard. And so there's passwords and some other personal identifiable information. So what is the solution? HTTPS will actually give us some of the security that is necessary for networking. So HTTPS is HTTP, which is the web protocol, over TLS, which gives us encryption. So I won't go into the specifics of the encryption, but what encryption gives us is privacy. So it scrambles, all of the data so that anybody who has access to the network, it can see data, but it can see it scrambled. It can't actually understand it. So it gives us privacy, and it also gives us integrity, which means that no one can tamper with that connection without somebody else actually knowing that happened. And this is really important because without HTTPS, without encryption, there's absolutely no way that you can have any expectation of security or privacy between yourself, using a browser, the user agent, and the server that you're trying to access. And for those of you that are, have a startup, there's no way that you can expect your users are actually seeing the content that you're sending them without it being tampered with or logged in. We've seen examples of people actually inserting their own ads in place of other people's service ads, and so like monetizing off of that traffic. So Last year, we published an HTTPS transparency report, and it shows a lot of statistics about what products that Google has are using HTTPS. My goal would be for all of us to be using all HTTPS. We're not there yet. It also shows the top 100 sites by a couple of different parameters on the web and what their HTTPS status is. And so earlier today, I was actually talking to some other people and reporters because 2 of the top search engines in Korea still don't have HTTPS. And so you're probably more familiar with them as users than me, but Naver and DOM both don't have HTTPS support yet fully. And so as part of our team are really trying to go out to different websites and find out where are they at in their progress to moving to HTTPS and what hurdles are they having, because a lot of the myths that people had about HTTPS from 10 years ago are no longer true today. So for example, some people say, it'll make my site slow, or it's too expensive, or it's too complicated. And so we try to work with some sites to really bust some of those myths, because we've made a lot of progress in terms of infrastructure and tools so that we think this is practical, and a majority of the web can be actually over HTTPS. Okay, so these are those objectives again. And I think it's really important to think about how hackers think when you're building your own services, because other people are going to be doing that. And so you should do it as well. And it will help you to make better defenses. So since I know there's a lot of folks who are working at startups, thinking about startups, security for startups, why should you care? I think it's really challenging, right, to be a startup and have to figure out everything. But I really would encourage you to be thinking about this very early on. Users pick services that they trust. And once you start building a service that has any kind of personally identifiable information, or people start having some dependency on, it's really important that you establish and can keep that trust, because once you lose it, it's hard, if not impossible, to get back. Now, a security incident can result in brand damage, which again, if you lose, may be impossible to actually recover from. It can result in opportunity cost, meaning if you have to deal with some kind of security breach, it takes time away from being able to actually work on your product. And then there's also potential fines and legal action. And I have seen examples of startups that have gone out of business because they have had actions taken against them that were unrecoverable. So I wanted to give some tips. And hopefully that you can find other tips online too. I think these are the top things that I would recommend. So first, encrypt all of your network traffic. Use HTTPS. Set it up now so you don't have to worry about it later. Let's Encrypt is a certificate authority that actually gives free certificates. There are other options as well, but get this from the start. If you are building an iOS application, you'll know that also in January, the iOS, the App Store requires you to be using HTTPS for all of your apps. And so get that out of the way to begin with. You should think of security as an attribute when you're picking development frameworks, as well as when you're figuring out your own infrastructure. So a lot of people are, setting up their infrastructure in the cloud. You really should be doing research into figuring out what is the security properties, history of any kind of cloud provider that you're using. And similarly, when picking frameworks, think about if it's a secure framework. By that, I mean, is it easy to write secure code? And is it hard to write insecure code? So if you are, for example, when picking some web templating system, cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgery are 2 very common security application flaws. Ideally, the web templating framework has automatic ways to actually escape input so that you don't even have to have developers think about it, because individuals make mistakes. And so the more that can be automated in the actual framework, the better. Now, I don't have, a list of all of the good and bad examples for frameworks and for infrastructure, but this is something that you can research. And I would just encourage you to actually think about security from the start when picking these things, because it really can make a difference long term. And you can't solve everything. Account security is really important. If your startup is going to offer accounts, make sure that the recovery options that you support for your users is not a weak point in their account security, because attackers will typically go after recovery options when trying to hijack accounts. Similarly, think about what your employees are using for their accounts, because an attacker that's trying to steal or compromise your service may actually try to attack your employees too. And so I would encourage you to use two-factor authentication or other means to actually make your account security as robust as possible. There will be bugs. There's nothing to be ashamed about there, but it's sort of, you should expect that there are going to be bugs both in your product as well as in the infrastructure that you're using. And so it's really important to have a patching plan in place. Think of, it's much easier to go through a scenario of how do we update our users, how do we update our systems when it's not a critical breach. And so you really should be thinking about how to do this beforehand. Expect that an encryption key may get leaked at some point, and you may have to change it. And so think through how you would actually do that, because if you don't, it really can bring down your service for much longer than what you'd expect. And then maybe one of the most important things to do once you reach a certain size, and I guess if I had to say a number, I would say once you've reached about 20 people, you should have one person that is owning security. And that doesn't mean that the one person is solving security for everybody, but that at least one person is responsible for thinking about it, thinking through, which frameworks and which infrastructure you're picking, thinking through what that patch plan is, and actually putting into place, some actions into actually doing it, and evangelizing security across the rest of the company. One of the things I say is if everybody owns it, then nobody owns it. And so once you get to a certain size, it really becomes important for one person to start thinking about this. And for that person then to, as the company grows, think about what other things they need, whether it's more team members or more services. Okay, that's my talk. So I guess if I was going to summarize it, I would say that hacking is a mindset and a skill set. It's not good or bad, and I don't think that curiosity is a crime. I would really encourage you to think like an attacker sometimes, think like a hacker, because other people will be doing it, and it can make your software better. And then for everybody who's working in a startup, think about security from the start. You don't have to have all of the solutions to begin with, but at a certain point, you really need somebody within the company to be thinking about this and to be evolving security, as you grow and become more successful. So thank you so much, and I'm happy to answer questions.